words on a calculator or on an Excel spreadsheet, and you can figure out what this number is working backwards. Okay, that's a little bit more beyond the scope of what we need to be doing. But yeah, you can.
That's what we need to hear.
That's it. Yeah.
We're not doing that tonight.
You're not doing that one tonight, but you need to kind of understand that in the real world that's what's going on. And so a lot of times what they'll report is they'll say later, this was what the cash was, and the yield, which is the market rate of interest, is figured out based on that.
Okay, because that's, yeah, I got confused in the language for this question. It was the 3.35% senior note was issued to yield, so the yield was the market.
Yeah, okay. Yield, effective, or market are all the same term.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so that's what we have in terms of pricing the bond. That's step one. Once you have your cash, it actually gets very easy, believe it or not.
So now we know we have 95,000.
901, right. So what's going to happen is, if you're doing a journal entry, your bond payable is the amount of the full face, and then your discount would be, what would be, 95,901 would be what? Minus 100,000. I should be able to do that in my head, but it's been a long day.
So not to jump in, but just the basic concept for the company is that
$4,099.
they will eventually have to pay 130 grand on this, but they've got an immediate benefit of 95,901.
Actually, it's not a benefit. Yeah, they've got immediate benefit. They're actually going to end up paying. Yeah. So if you think about what happens, is they're really ending up paying conceptually. What they should have done is borrowed 100, paid back 100, and paid 30,000.
Right.
So what they should have had was an inflow of 100 and an outflow of 130. The difference would have been interest of 30. Now what they have is an inflow of 95,901 and an outflow of 130.
So the actual damage or deficit is 130 plus the
4,099. Is that what you decided it was?
Yeah.
Yeah, the 4,099. Okay,
Okay.
exactly. What this represents is interest that is essentially prepaid because you paid it up front because you took less cash in hand.
What the DC is discount?
What's DC?
Discount.
Oh, discount.
Bond discount.
Yeah, bond discount.
You won't. I'd say you
Of
won't.
course, yeah. Think about this. Long
You wouldn't
before-
do this to me. No,
John's got me figured out, man.
I'm rolling with this one now.
Um,
About $1.30 in that first one.
all right. So if you were to phrase the question to the effect of, what's the benefit to any organization or company of issuing a bond for $100,000 versus taking out a loan for 130, especially the way interest rates are right now?
They should end up in the same place. Because if you go to a bank and say, I need to borrow $100,000, they should set an interest rate based on the riskiness of your company at 7%.
But that would, in real world terms, it would be commensurate with what the bond value is of the
Yes.
market. Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
So the idea is if you went to a banker and said, I need $100,000, the banker would look at your risk profile and say, 7% interest is what you're going to have to pay.
Right.
These guys are saying, we only want to pay 6% interest, and so the idea is the banker would say, I'm not giving you $100,000 on that. You're going to have to get. I'd give you 95 or 96 for that, but I wouldn't give you. I wouldn't give you 100,000. So it should be equivalent to what the bank would give.
Right.
Should be.
So one-time payment. So
Yep.
So if I say, I want to give you this one-time payment, what would that one-time payment be? $100,000? What
Yep.
would it be? You're just paying it that.
You're paying off the debt. So the bond payable is nothing different than a note payable. Because what I've done is instead of going to a bank and saying, can you give me 100,000, I've gone to the public and said, can you give me 100,000?
Only they're giving you 90. They're only giving you 71.
Right. They're giving you 91. Well, it's 71 plus the interest, so they're giving you the difference there. Okay. Yeah, which is kind of like.
Why would you do that?
You do. Well, there's a couple of reasons why you do it. One is you want to control your cash flows for the next 5 years. So if you can set an interest rate that you can afford from a cash flow basis, you can set a lower interest rate. What you're then going to recognize is what they probably do is work backwards. what they say is, how much cash do we really need? We really need 95,000. But we recognize we can only pay 6,000 in interest in terms of true cash flow. So what would we have to do that? They'd say, oh, if we ask for 100, we'll get 95 and we'll still only have to pay 6. The rest of it will come out the front and they're fine with that. So somebody is doing cash management and figuring out what exactly cash flows do we need. There's not a lot of surprises going on in the marketplace.
No.
Yeah, they
No
pretty much
surprises.
know what's there. They've got it figured out. They've tested the waters enough that they know exactly what like companies are getting. You know, companies that are just as equally as risky, they're following all that. So it's not that much of a
So
surprise.
when this happens, there's also another journal entry, right? Because you get cash.
Yes, and the other side of it is cash. So you're getting, would help if I put the discount on the right side. Sorry about that. This is a contra account.
Oh,
Discount should go on the left,
that's good enough.
which means the cash is 95,901, the net of those two. So yeah, at the very, very beginning, my cash equals to my net bond.
Then where would you put in the interest expense?
We're gonna put the interest expense eventually on the income statement, but at times, the thing about interest can only occur with the passage of time. If I turned around tomorrow and bought back this bond, I would pay approximately the same amount. The market is still at 7%. I would probably pay 95,901, maybe a little bit of a premium to get my bond back because the market's still at that point. Okay? As I get closer and closer to the bond due date, that market's going to shift down to 6% just over time because that's what it's going to do as you get closer to that due date. So the idea is at this point in time, I have no interest
Until next year.
till next year. Interest can only be recorded when time has passed because what it says is I've held on to something for a year, I owe interest on it. But if you pay it back tomorrow, you don't owe any interest other than 24 hours worth, which is basically your spot market, your overnight market. There are markets that work that way.
So if the rate goes down in 2 years, you know, it goes down to like 4%, they say we're gonna sell it because we can get a lower rate in the bank.
Yep, and they'll go and buy back their own bonds,
Yep.
and then they'll turn around and reissue at that lower rate, and they're probably gonna save money. It's like refinancing a house. You know, there comes a certain point in time that it makes sense to refinance, and there's other points in times where it doesn't. So the longer the bond life is, the more likely you're gonna refinance. The closer you're getting to the end point anyhow, it's not worth the cash out to refinance, you're gonna stick with those rates.
So I mean, if there's, you know, a question on that scenario, will the number that they're gonna sell it for, we provide it? Or do we have to?
I would have to give that to you.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so we got the journal entry, right? Okay.
Yep.
So, what we need to now know is for the next 5 years, what are the journal entries we're gonna have to make? And what type of impact does that have on our financial statements? That's where that amortization table comes up, because it's a way of figuring out how much interest do I owe every single year for the next 5 years to get until my bond is completely gone. Okay. So what you end up with is you've got times 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. The cash payment this is all about interest. So the cash I'm gonna pay is $6,000 every year for 5 years. I'm locked into that. Okay, I said I was gonna give 6%. That's what the contract says. I cannot get out of that. So that cash amount is always based on that contract, which is always the amount you'll actually see in the tables. If they call something a 6% bond or a 9.5% bond, that's the stated face interest. That's the contract rate. Okay, it's never the market rate. It's always the contract rate. Okay. Then what's going to happen is we're going to figure out what our interest expense is, and the interest expense will always be based on market times book value. And conceptually, the way to think about this is, well, if I borrowed $95,901 in cash, and I had borrowed it at 7%, what would my interest be? Well, it would be 7% times 95,901, and then we're going to call the difference between those two amortization, It's simply the difference between the two, and that difference comes out of that discount account, and we're gonna come up with another net bond payable new amount. Your net is always the face minus the discount. Okay, so what that means is 7% of 95,901.
At the tables too, if you want them.
Yeah, no, I'm flying to this point. 0.0 blah, times 95,901. 6713 I get,
671307, yeah.
which means there's a $713 difference. That must be the difference between the 6% rate and the 7% rate. Because this is my 6% rate, this is my 7% rate. So the difference between the stated and the market is worth $713 extra interest, okay? Interest expense will always be higher when you have a discount. Why? Because the market rate of interest was higher. If it was a premium, this number would be lower because the interest rate would have been lower by that amount. So if you can always remember that if this is 6% and this is 7%, you can always check yourself to make sure you're going in the right direction because you'll see it. Okay. So what we're saying is in journal entry form, we take 713 out of that discount account, and we end up paying cash of $6,000, and then we have interest expense of $6713, or the sum of those two numbers.
Okay, that's the first year.
That's the
inflation.
first year. Interest expense is on your income statement. Cash is on your cash flow statement. It's coming out of the discount account, which means my net is going to go down or is going to go up by 713. So it's going to, as this discount goes down by 713, my net has to go up because this balance is now 4099, whoops, minus 713, 3386, and that minus 100,000 is 96,614,
Yep.
which is, by George, 95,901 plus 713. Okay. Notice my bond payable account doesn't do a thing, because that's what I owe in the future. We don't touch that account till we pay it back off. So the only thing that's happening is this discount account that's paired with it is changing because time has passed and we have the interest. It's no longer prepaid interest, it's now interest expense. That's another way of thinking about it. What we said is this was a prepaid interest. I'm using that interest up as time goes by. I'm using part of that up and I'm paying part of it off in cash. Okay. Another way of thinking about this is if you had been able to sit down and negotiate with the bank would have expected a check of $6,713, not $6,000. You paid them $6,000 plus the amount that they took up front. And that's why it all works out from an accounting standpoint. And why you're all going, oh my God. I'm telling you, once you get bonds, you will never forget them. Because they'll click, and it's like, okay, this makes perfect sense.
It's just like at home. I ask my wife for $10, she gives me $5.
You got it! You got it! And she expects you to pay
And
back.
she expects a 10.
Right. You got it. You need no problem. Okay? Okay, so then the next year, you're going to have 96,614 times 7%. It's going to be 6763. Which is 763. So we've got 96,614 plus 763 is 97,377. Always make sure this number is going up toward its face amount. So the very, very last year, when all is said and done,